Welcome to I'm Not Joking, the podcast where a behavioral scientist examines what it's like to live a humorous life. Glimpse into the lives of the funniest people in entertainment, business, and science as your host, Dr. Peter McGraw, explores their habits, motivations, and secrets to success. Get ready to fire up your brain and your funny bone. Now, here's your host.
Welcome to I'm Not Joking, the podcast that looks at the lives of funny people. I'm Peter McGraw. Today's guest is Matt Walsh. Matt is a founding member of the National Improv Sketch Comedy Theater Upright Citizens Brigade, which has schools and venues in both New York and Los Angeles. Chicago-born, Walsh was instructed by Del Close, and Matt is in very good company. Del's students included John Belushi, Bill Murray, Tina Fey, and Mike Myers. Walsh currently stars in HBO's comedy series Veep, and I think most interesting, he has produced and directed his own comedy films, A Better You, High Road, and the recently released Under the Eiffel Tower. Welcome, Matt.
Thank you, Peter. I didn't direct Under the Eiffel Tower, but I did produce and help co-write. So
okay.
I had a finger in the pie, but that's okay.
Excellent.
It's okay.
Matt, if you weren't working in comedy, what would you be doing?
Is that the question you always ask?
It is.
Is that like the Krista Tippett? You ever listen to Krista Tippett?
No.
She always asks, what was your spiritual background? She does a podcast called On Being, and she starts every interview as like, if you had one, what was your spiritual or religious upbringing?
Oh, is that
That's
right?
Like a springboard. If I wasn't doing comedy, I think I'd be in psychology or teaching.
So you'd be me.
Are you psych?
I'm a psych PhD, and
yeah.
I mean teaching not primarily, but I spend a decent amount of time.
Yeah, I had I was a psych major at Northern Illinois, and then I did post-grad work various places and worked on a psych ward for like 2.5 years for disturbed adolescents as a mental health worker.
Okay.
And then realized there's no way I could handle that.
The clinical side of it's really tough.
Teenagers especially are an emotional roller coaster, and it's a very disturbed. There's a lot of pathology on the ward. There was eating disorders and borderline pre-schizophrenic. They wouldn't throw the labels on them yet, but they were headed that way.
Mm-hmm.
And we saw Tourette's, and we saw, suicide attempts, obviously, and saw some wealthy kids just being put away so their parents didn't have to deal with them. So we had a real mix.
It sounds like a movie in the making.
It is. I wrote a screenplay, and then we turned it into like 6 episodes of TV, but have yet to sell it.
Is that right?
Yeah, it's absolutely true, though. Yeah, because it is like that. I find it interesting because it is that moment when we all get out of college and know like what we're going to do. And then we spend 2 or 3 years doing it. And we're like, oh, God, I can't do this. Or I don't want to do this. Like everybody studies to be an accountant, a teacher. And then we push through and we think, oh, that's it. And then we spend those years realizing what we don't want to do.
Mm-hmm.
And then also for me on the psych ward, I was like 22 and some of the patients were like 19. And there's very little difference between a 19-year-old and a 22-year-old. Yet I was supposedly the role model, and I was supposedly the one with the answers, and I was struggling to figure out life myself. So that's what I think is at the core of a story like that.
Yeah, I can see that. I will happily talk you out of the life that I lead if you want. Although I do quite like it a lot.
Did you ever do therapy? Like patients where they come in and do talk therapy?
I've paid people to do it, to sit in their office.
How about you being the one who offers course corrections?
It's interesting you say this because I don't do it professionally, but I'm happy to do it with my friends.
Okay. Yeah.
So I have a saying that I like to give advice and I like to take advice. Now, of course, that's anti-therapy, right? Like, because therapists are supposed to let you discover the advice there. I feel like you could save people a lot of time and money if you just tell them
get to it.
Do. But of course,
I sort of agree with you.
I used to joke. I was during my PhD, I was in a quantitative psychology program, but there was also a clinical and counseling psychology program there too. So like the two sides, the research students, like the social psychology and cognitive psychology students, and then these clinical and counseling students would mix a lot, and so on. And I used to always joke that I was going to start a directive counseling psychology program where you just direct people as to how they should live their lives. the folks in those programs never appreciated that joke, I think.
It's not clinical, and it's not. What are the kinds? There's clinical psychology. There's Freudian psychology still, or is that not even a thing?
I don't think it's really a thing. I mean, I think that those principles still find themselves in that kind of on the more
eclectic therapy, where everybody takes a bit of everything. But what are the schools? There's clinical.
It's basically clinical and counseling, and the counseling programs are not even really that big anymore. And I couldn't really give you a good difference between them. Like as an outsider, they seem totally the same. Okay. But if you're in one of them, you're like, oh, no.
Okay.
It's completely different.
Okay.
The big thing is cognitive behavioral therapy. That's like the technique. It's certainly the best research supported technique. Like that is cognitive behavioral therapy works. The problem is you can only use it for certain things. So it works well for like anxiety and things like obsessive compulsive disorders and so on. It doesn't work very well for the kinds of profound psychological problems that you are dealing with in this ward.
So what's the goal of cognitive behavioral therapy?
So it's sort of this 1-2 punch. It essentially recognizes that a lot of maladaptive, basically problems that people have are due to kind of either maladaptive cognitions and or behaviors. And so it seeks to break the habit that you have. And you do that by kind of retraining your mind to recognize that you're having these cognitions that might be a problem and to work to change them. And then also to adapt your behaviors also. So, people use it for things like smoking, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
And so, because there's both cognitions and behaviors that are automatic. And so you have to try to reverse them and so on. So what would be an example? So my favorite example of this is I had a buddy who would talk about like social anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
And so he would give his patients challenges. This is very comedic, actually.
Mm-hmm.
He would give his so the worry is if you have social anxiety, you're just worried that people are going to like laugh at you and judge you negatively and so on. And what the average person doesn't realize is no one gives a shit about you, and even when you do something stupid, they're rarely ever judging you negatively. Oftentimes there's a lot of empathy there. And so, so he would have people stain their shirts. Like, so he would have them like put ketchup or mustard on their shirt and a huge stain purposely, and then go out into the world and observe what happens. And the interesting was nothing happens. You know what I mean? Or people are like, oh, that's too bad. Oh, it's terrible, kind of thing, versus pointing and laughing. And my favorite example of this is he'd have these guys go into like a public restroom and sit in the stall and make really loud grunting noises.
And then people would be sympathetic, like, are you okay in there, basically?
Or just nothing. They wouldn't say anything. You know what I mean? Kind of.
But your identity is blocked. That true. One seems safer.
Though you still have to get out at some point.
Yeah, but you could time that with a new crowd. That's basically like a prank.
It's so funny. The funniest thing about that was, this is 20 years ago. He's telling me about this stuff when I was a student. He was a student. There was a toilet down in the basement of the psychology building where my lab was. So I used that a lot. And at one point I was in there. I wasn't making grunting noises, but let's just say it was one of the more aromatic experiences that I've had.
Yeah.
And someone came in there to use the urinal and wash their hands. And when they were walking, I can't believe I'm telling this story. I've never told this story. As they were leaving, as the door was closing, they just said, "You stink."
Anonymously, right? You did not know that person.
I don't know that person. They didn't know me. It was an anonymous exchange, which first of all, I started cracking up laughing.
Yeah.
And I just thought to myself, Jay, who was my friend, is like, man, that really would have backfired on him if that was an intervention he was trying to use.
That's funny.
In any case, I'm glad you're in comedy because we're similar ages, and over the years I've seen many of the movies that you that you watch. Actually, recently I have a computer attached to my TV and it crapped out. And I viewed that as like a blessing. Like it was like the world telling me, Pete, you have a lot of deadlines. This is not for you right now. But I have this old pile of DVDs and I was going through them and I came across, what is it called? Old School. And I was like, you know what? Let me see how funny this still is. And I popped it in. And it's aged pretty well, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you were in there, and I was like, oh, there's Matt.
Yeah.
I'm going to interview him in a couple days.
Yeah.
And you play like the guy at work who wants in on this fraternity.
Yes. Yes.
I need this, man.
I need this. Yeah. I got to get in. Yeah. Yeah. That was a great movie.
It was a fun movie.
And it did age well. I agree with you. Yeah.
It's some of these things, these sort of male focused movies.
Since like the whole awakening of like the Me Too movement and stuff. Yeah, it's interesting what will age well. Yeah.
Yeah, like for instance, speaking of Belushi,
does Animal House play well?
It's terrible.
Oh, it plays awful. I haven't watched it
It's
recently.
super rapey.
Yeah.
It's really
Yeah, sure.
There's like a whole scene with a devil and an angel on a guy's shoulder and a passed out woman. It's really uncomfortable.
Underage woman too. She's like 16 or something.
She is.
Yeah.
On the other hand, the Blues Brothers is outstanding still.
Yeah.
It's still great.
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
I could see that. Yeah.
So when you're doing that, when you're doing Old School, you're in for a few days. How?
No, Old School. Welcome, my gardeners, by the way.
No problem.
Old School, I think I was on and off for like a month or two. Like they shot stuff at UCLA, and we shot at various like office buildings.
There's a USC scene.
There's probably a USC scene in there, but I feel like some of the stuff I remember being at UCLA campus for, and so I would say like a month and a half or two, and then there was like a couple days additional that they wanted to add some like epilogue-y stuff, or they wanted to add some pieces to connect certain scenes. I think like a van or something like that I was in listening, or I forget.
Oh yes, that's right. Okay.
That was a later piece.
By the way, admittedly, I didn't watch the whole movie. I actually
seen it,
but I've seen the movie many years ago. But I just popped it in, and then so I don't remember how many minutes of screen time you have. But I stopped shortly after the scene where you get
smacked.
You get smacked.
Yeah, that's classic. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
How many takes does that smack take?
The smack was probably 3 or 4, and it was about, Luke Wilson, very nice guy. He's like, does that hurt? I'm like, no, go for it. Like, let's just do this. And so it never really hurt, but it does like startle you and sting a little bit. But it was like to capture it in a real way was funny. Like just to go bam.
The timing that works great.
Yeah.
You say the phrase about the daughter, and then it's like boom, and then he realizes how he's crossed the line.
Yeah.
So when you're doing a movie like that, I get the sense there's a lot of waiting around.
Yeah.
Like as an actor, there's a lot of waiting around, and then you have to be on.
Yeah.
How do you manage that? Like, is it easy for you to turn it on and off? Like, do you have a process? I'm just sort of curious about this idea that like you're sitting in a trailer, or you're chilling out, you're doing makeup, you're kind of easy,
well,
and then the next thing you know, you step onto a set and you have to be this other person.
I mean, it's pretty light lifting. It's not heavy lifting. You're not wearing prosthetics. You're not doing an impression of a character. You're not like quoting giant monologues. It's scenic, and so you're doing scenes. So to get into character, fortunately for me, it's not hard. Like I would assume on the days we would get the scene, and Todd Phillips was there, and he's like, all right, here's the scene. And then we'd kind of say it out loud. And then he's like, all right, let's try this here. And then in a loose collaborative way, people might pitch an idea, like Will or somebody might have an idea like, I don't like this or that, or Todd might have a new line. So it's very malleable, and it never feels like we have to go on stage and execute perfectly in front of this live audience. It's always in flux. So somehow you get through it that way, with that sort of like willingness to have it be malleable and learn from consecutive takes.
And I assume your improv background makes you well suited for that.
I do like
thing.
looseness, and I do like openness to open air inside a scene to play with stuff, and then not necessarily even verbal, just to like have really like to milk awkward silences or to play with distance from the character you're with, like walking away to get something at an inopportune time, which might create a laugh, like all that stuff. Having liberty to do those things, which we do on Veep a fair amount, is really fun as an actor, and you're collaborating.
Mm-hmm. And in Veep, you're doing like rehearsals of sorts?
Yeah, in Veep, we do table reads. And then if there's a problematic scene or two, they'll pull an actor or two from that scene and they'll kind of put it on his feet and workshop it the day of the writing or the table read. And then on the day of filming, they've done 5 or 10 rewrites of that script and sometimes successive table reads if needed. But on the day of filming, it's pretty tight. It's all written. And then you rehearse and you pitch ideas and you can paraphrase, because we all, I own my character for 7 seasons and they're very like respectful of like, oh, he's great at that. Yeah. What do you think, Mike? Or what do you think, Matt? Like,
you're like, yeah, he wouldn't do that. Or he wouldn't.
Yeah, you can do that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or you find a way to like, they're like, it's funny. Like, really? So then you have to go like, all right, how do I sell this? How do I make this funny? Because there are moments where you're like, I don't know. And they're like, no, it's funny. It's funny. And I'm like, okay, all right. Then you trust them and you trust the process and you try to find a way to do it. But if it's like way off target, you of course like, there's no way. I don't even understand this. Like, why is this funny? Or why this doesn't work? Can I suggest this? And so there's those conversations.
So the actors in Veep they sort of serve as like, not gatekeeper is not the right word, but like a test of sorts. Like if you read the lines and you go, because my feeling about, I don't know a lot about writers' rooms. On one hand, I think like, what a fun job. And then on the other hand, I think, wow, that sounds really hard. Because you're trying to, in a room with a bunch of other people, create dialogue that's going to be really funny.
Yeah.
But, the place that you're doing it, that room, and the place that it's being executed are wildly different.
Yeah.
And so can you get to a point as a writer where you kind of convince yourself, oh, this is good, and it may be good in that place, but it's less so when you're performing?
I think when table reads happen, like for me as an actor, that's like the most exciting time because you're seeing the material for the first time and it's very fresh. So it's like some of those laughs take you by surprise, and it's really self-indulgently fun to like to step into a table read and just read it and hear the laughter and see how things play. The writers will sit in a donut around the table and they're nervous that like if their contributions don't work or whatever, but they're also wanting to hear. They have in their mind like, oh, if Mike says it this way, it'll be funny. And lo and behold, I'll say it that way and it does work. Or I'll say it a different way, or I'll add a paraphrasing and they'll be like, oh, right, that's a better way to do it. So everyone's kind of like, again, like checking their ego a little bit and looking for the best version of what that script can be.
This, so what you're describing really is.
But in truth, the writers really get excited for table reads because it elevates what's on the page. They have no idea, truthfully, if something's funny. And then to see it be funny and with these characters interacting across the table elevates it. And and those interactions, you find authentic moments and new discoveries and like, oh my God, that was so much funnier. And there was nothing on the page. Like those kind of moments are what everybody lives for in that table read.
Yeah, I see. It sounds really quite collaborative.
Yeah.
Which so improv is my favorite form of comedy. I went just the other night to see Sentimental Lady, and I never get tired of those guys.
Yeah, they're amazing.
And obviously it doesn't get any more collaborative than improv.
Right.
One of the things that I think sort of interesting about comedy more generally is the notion of collaboration. Like even what you think is like the most singular solo form of comedy, which is stand-up, actually has a lot of collaborative elements to it. So, for instance, comics are constantly kind of bouncing ideas off each other and giving each other notes, in the green room, in the bar afterwards.
Yeah.
And even the process of creating stand-up is collaborative because you've got to test jokes with an audience. So you actually need an audience in order to make a future audience laugh.
Mm-hmm.
And it's probably no surprise that comedy is so collaborative because it is a social art form, you know. So I've been looking back. I was doing a little bit of research about the kind of Seinfeld process of creating a sitcom.
Mm-hmm.
And to your point, what you just said is you don't know. There's these stories of Larry David and Jerry Seinfeld locking themselves in an office to complete the script. And then they would send the notes out to be typed up. I mean, this is back in the day, right? So like literally typed up by an assistant. And sometimes she would just be tickled by what was on the page and she would laugh out loud. And they would run out of the office to see what she was laughing at.
Because they had no idea?
Well, you know, you have a hunch, but like, what is that thing? So it sounds very, very similar.
Yeah.
As in this donut around the table.
Yeah, and I think a willingness to throw out what you think are great ideas and go back to work. Like that's ultimately what's in the DNA of Veep. For many seasons, they would scrap whole episodes after the table. You're like, we wouldn't see the process, but the writers would confab and go away. And then we would come back and say, we're going to take another week of hiatus. I see. And then you knew like, oh, Armando wasn't happy with that. Or Dave Mandel in the early seasons when he came on board. There were times where we were like, nope, not good. We're going back to the drawing board. And so I think that holding yourself to that sort of greedy, it's got to be perfect, but we don't know what it is up until the last minute on set when you're still filming, you still don't kind of know what exactly it's going to be. I think that serves you well.
So would you say, because actually I have this, would you say that's one of the secrets to Veep's success is this willingness to toss out, get rid of ideas? Take the extra time.
I mean, for me as an actor, I would say like, obviously the writing's spectacular. Like that's the first thing you have to have for a good comedy. So we've had great writers for 7 years, just incredible writing staffs, like a murderer's row of British dudes and ladies and American dudes and ladies, like just fantastic. Couldn't ask for a better staff. So that's the first part. And then I think like the way the show began is they wanted input. Armando and the Brits wanted input because for whatever reason, some reasons being they're American. And so they're going to say things slightly different. There's like idioms and things to hear. And also they were creating a pilot and then a new first season. So they wanted to see how we embodied the characters. And Armando would always say, like, I don't care where the best idea comes from, as long as it's the best idea. It could come from the catering lady. It could come from anyone. He really was trying to cull all the ideas and make sure the best ones were executed. So I think that stayed in the DNA of the show. And it is very open to pitching ideas. And so I feel empowered as an actor to go for it or try things and bring ideas and pitch jokes for other characters to the writers or to the characters themselves.
You know, this reminds me, there's the Anna Karenina principle about all happy families are happy for the same reason and all unhappy families are unhappy for different reasons. And so the idea, I think what you're sort of saying is, you know, Veep's a happy family.
Mm-hmm.
And in the world of comedy, what that means is you need a great showrunner. You need great writers. You need great actors. You need them to get along.
Yeah.
You need a good idea, you know, you need a good premise. Like everything has to kind of fall into place. I mean, not by luck, but, and so on. And so you seem to have all those things with that show.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you one more question about that. Then I want to talk to you about your directing. So I don't normally talk politics on this pod, but you know, Veep preceded this current presidency. Mm-hmm. And I'm just curious, right, as you play a press secretary like character, is there anything like, I can't believe this is happening? Like, you know what I mean? Like in terms of art imitating reality, in terms of how the presidency has sort of changed in a sense.
Is there any?
I don't know. Like,
did I have any inkling this was coming?
No.
What is your question?
Just like, what is your reaction now? Like, you were living Veep before the presidency. You're living Veep now. Has it changed your either your perspective of the presidency or your perspective of the show?
Well, I think for everyone in the country, it's changed the perspective of the presidency.
Indeed. Yeah, that's fair.
So I feel like the sort of common courtesies that aren't necessarily in the Constitution, but have been executed by generations of presidents have fallen by the wayside with Trump. Like he's just a wild card and a narcissist, basically. So it's been shocking to see on the domestic stage and the international stage. It's just disappointing, very disappointing. And it's also a reflection of, I think, the divide that exists in the country. There is a real, like, obviously the people that still cling to Trump felt like the improvements of the Obama administration were passing them by. It's like, why do they get to be so happy and we're still losing our jobs in these various communities that we're still taking root in? Like, that has to be fixed, like that. And that goes back to the Clinton era, actually, because there was a lot of divide in the Clinton White House or the Clinton Congress, et cetera. So the seeds had been sown many, years ago. But my take on like politics is consistent. Like, I don't ever want to be a politician. I think it's the hardest job in the world. I got to meet, as a result of like this recent, midterm, I'm not really a political animal. I'm really not, but I got involved with this guy in Illinois named Sean Casten, who's from my home district. And he's like a guy who cares about the environment and like came from like a business where he helped companies pollute less and also save energy and save money. And that was how he made his money, his millions. He's very successful. And so he's kind of someone that I admire, and I got involved with him and I got to see how elections run, and I helped get behind his campaign and he won a campaign. So I thought that was like an interesting, me personally, my journey, because I really am not that political.
You happen to be on a show about politics.
I'm on a show about politics. And also I think there is a certain feeling of like crisis with Trump in the White House. I just felt like many people do feel like this is abnormal and it's sort of degrading our institutions. And then the ultimate truth is like, well, democracy only works if people get in there and get involved. So I kind of got involved in a bigger way than I had before. Not just like writing checks, but like flying out, doing a fundraiser live, going knocking on doors, whatever you can do, visiting the campaign office when I go back to visit my mom, like whatever you can do, put your shoulder behind that cause and try to uplift morale. Cause like celebrities are there to just be show ponies and like uplift morale and take photos and like a little bit, but you can also do some real work.
Yeah. You and Oprah knocking on doors.
Yeah. Oprah, our next president.
I think Oprah was knocking on doors in Atlanta or something like that.
Yeah. Probably right? For Stacey Abrams.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
So you are a producer and a director also. So can you tell me a little bit about how that happened, when that happened, why it's happening? Like, I'm curious about the kind of diversification of your career.
I think simply put, like everybody can do things themselves. Like I came out of a sketch background where we, UCB would bring their trunk to New York and we would do a show, and then we would fly back to Chicago, and then we would fly to LA and do a showcase again. And then we would move to New York and we would travel 3 different theaters, but you're constantly putting up your own stuff, trying to get noticed on your own. It's not like you're waiting for your agent to send you the script to audition for the next Aaron Sorkin thing. It's like you are constantly making your own opportunities, basically. And so that is an extension of what I've always done as a comedian or improviser or actor, is just try to do shows, try to write things that are funny, and then try to perform them in front of audiences and build good reputation and word of mouth. And so at some point, I think I saw a void in like the improv movies, because a lot of people I knew were doing improv movies and I know improv pretty well. So I felt like, well, I could do an improv movie because I know funny actors and I have a sense of how to manage an improv story. So it was a hunger to do that, and also to maybe create an opportunity. Like I like directing. The challenges are, enormous, raising money and then producing and making your days and all that. So that's the learning curve for me. But I've made 2 of them and I really enjoyed it, and I'll probably make another one. My wife and I are kind of writing this script that hopefully we'll be making next year, 2020. Yeah,
that's exciting.
Yeah,
I spoke to, I spoke to this guy. So I'm starting to do a little bit of research on entertainment, and so when I started to get into it, I started just talking to whoever I could talk to, whoever
Yeah.
would talk to me about it. And I asked him about the role of the director. I was like, this strikes me as an incredibly difficult job. And the way he described it was the thousands of decisions you have to make. You're shaking your head, yes. Slowly.
Well, it's like decision fatigue. Like every single decision in a movie technically is signed off on by the director.
Mhm.
Whether he gives somebody autonomy, like you can pick whatever song you want or pick whatever fabric you want, like whoever you empower, or everyone's coming up to you in the video village saying, do you like the shirt? Which hammer? How do you like the light?
He describes
Can
it
you
also.
go shoot? Come on, here's some locations. Here's some paint colors. Here's the new draft. Here's the tapes of the auditions. Like all of it. Every single thing is coming your way. And my friend, who's a successful director, he said, yeah. And he's like, and sometimes you're just going to have to like pretend you have an opinion. Like he said, there were moments on movies he's made. He's made several movies, and people come up to him and like, what do you think of, this eggshell white on the chair? And he has no fucking opinion. And he's like, no, that one. Just to make it seem like he has an opinion. So it's kind of faking it until you make it too.
So how did you, so when you're directing,
Mhm.
how do you deal with those, as you call it, decision fatigue?
Mhm.
And does that affect your life when you come home, for instance?
It doesn't necessarily affect my life when I come home. I feel very lucky to direct. Like, honestly, like I'm in a good mood when I come home from directing.
You
Because
like
it's
it a
like,
lot.
oh my God, it's the best job in the world. It's very challenging and extremely tiring. Like you might be tired, but it's also like, oh my God, like I'm directing a movie. Like that's really exciting and really fun. And then you get to the edit room, which is even funner. Like that's a race. You just want to get in the edit room because then you can really see it get better and put it together.
And when you think of, so there's I think it's a Hitchcock saying, which is a movie's made 3 times: when you write it, when you shoot it, and when you edit it.
Sure. You would know.
I think that the editing side of things is like super overlooked by the average person.
Yeah.
They don't really understand how a movie can be made. You can make or break a movie in the editing room.
Yeah.
And so, and you sound excited about being in the editing room.
Yeah. I love the
Tell me why.
On a simple level, it is where you see improvement and you have tangible results from your choices. So you can tinker with one scene or a 2-line exchange, and you can know at the end of the day, like, try this song or try that take or try this take. And at the end of the day, you can see the results and it's like, that's better. It's very immediate.
Yeah. It's like almost like an experimenting process.
Yeah. There's infinite nagging problems and all constantly hanging above your head in the edit room, but there's very tangible progress. You can, like, when you're as a sculptor, you're chiseling away things that don't work.
Yes.
And so that's what I love about the edit room. And it's also, you're just that much closer to a film. Like once you're watching it, on a screen or a little monitor, it feels like, oh, okay, I can see the experience of an audience a little better now.
Do you ever have regrets in the editing room where you go, I wish I had X?
Yeah. You don't want to have too many, but I'm sure, like, I don't have an example, but I'm sure there were days, hopefully not too many, where the producer's like, we got to go. We lose the restaurant in 30 minutes and we have to film the restaurant scene.
I see.
So you're like, fuck it. All right, one more take and we're out. And then the thing you were working on gets squeezed by the thing that you have to go get to because locations are jumping. So there are those moments where it's like, yeah, it's serviceable what we got, but it wasn't the best.
It doesn't shine the way.
And those are the hopefully things you can fix or work around or take the one best take and hope it carries. But I think it's also, in general, like whatever you're doing, it seems like as an actor or a director or even a writer, like you're constantly testing things with feedback or collaboration or smarter minds than your own and getting feedback to massage them, to bring them a more elevated execution. But at the end of the day, a lot of what you're doing is you just have these trained unconscious instincts or impulses that have guided you so well through this point. And so someone says, why don't you say this? And you're like, you don't verbalize yet why you don't like it, but the comes out, and that's your instinct and that's your craft. You're like, whatever that is you're intuiting and you're visualizing that thing being executed, and some part of you is going, I don't know why. And then the logic can be formed, and then the pitches of newer versions of what could be better can come out. But you have to listen. What you have to do is, if someone shows you the coffee mugs for the guy's home desk and they give you 3, and something's like, I don't know, all of them could be good, but
there's
something you see a bright blue one and you go, that's the caveman in you, or that's the animal, or that's the instinct that you're sort of trying to follow because you're trusting all your experience and your voice, perhaps, or the realness that you're trying to capture.
Yeah, I mean, I think
it's not very gracefully said, but that's truly what I believe.
Well, I'll say it even less gracefully. I mean, I think what you're describing is this idea of you've developed skills, and sometimes it's actually, as you develop the skills, it becomes harder to articulate.
Yeah.
Right. So it manifests in a feeling.
Yeah.
And
I'll give you a psych ward example. Is you would see kids on the unit, and then a week in, you'd see their parents walk on the unit, and you'd go, oh, okay, I get it. I know why they're screwed up.
Right.
And you never talk to those parents, but there's something about those people that walked on the unit. You're like, oh God, now I know why you're screwed up.
Yeah, that's interesting. Wow. So you've produced Under the Eiffel Tower.
Yeah. So
and it's a rom-com.
It's a rom-com, which was a genre I hadn't done. And I play a bourbon salesman out of Kentucky who loses his job and then goes on a family vacation with David Wayne and Michaela Watkins.
Okay. And
then I'm trying to fix my life, so I propose to their 27-year-old daughter on vacation, who's like she has a PhD in art history, and we're talking romantically about paintings. I'm like, oh my God, we should be married. Like, gets a ring, proposes, and then it just goes south from there.
And she says yes.
No, she says no. She says no, of course, appropriately so. And then he goes on an odyssey and a drinking bender because he's stuck in Europe now, through France.
But you've been exiled.
Yeah, the family's like, thanks a lot for ruining our vacation, Stuart. And so then I run into Reed Scott, from my buddy from Veep, who plays a Scottish footballer.
Okay.
And we go on a drinking bender through France and end up both sort of landing in this vineyard where this woman, Judith Godresh, who plays the female lead, owns a vineyard, and love story begins. A little competition between. A more challenging and a more appropriate. Yeah, definitely.
I see. And Under the Eiffel Tower, the title?
Yes.
But why the title?
Because that's where that awful proposal happened.
Got it. Okay.
He is inspired by France, and he's under the Eiffel Tower.
Yeah, so romantic.
Yes. And so he makes the big mistake of doing that. Yeah.
Oh, that sounds so cringeworthy.
Yeah, it is pretty good. It is pretty good. I think it's comedic. And we got to spend a summer in France 2 summers ago. And
we were talking about boondoggles while we were walking.
It was a boondoggle.
Here.
Yeah, you get your fan. My wife is in the movie. She's great. She plays my boss. Kids got to see France, and then we went to London. And I brought Gary Cole over for a week from
that's
Veep.
Great.
So it was great. It was a lot of friends and really, really fun to do. And I think it turned out really well.
When you have so you just described this as a lot of fun. It sounds like it was fun personally and professionally.
Yeah. Yeah.
When that's happening and you kind of reflect on your life, right? So your alternative life is working as a clinical psychologist somewhere.
Sure.
Do you kind of go, wow, this has been hard work, but the level of appreciation in terms of, you live an interesting life, Matt. I mean,
as your view, I do. No, I'm very fortunate. Yeah, I get to go to France.
You've adapted to it, but you live an interesting life.
Yes, and I got to go to France, for example, and make a movie with friends and help write it and help edit it.
Shoot at the Eiffel Tower.
Yeah,
those kinds of things.
Yeah, my nephew Chris is in the movie. It was a whole family affair.
That's fun.
Hilarious. Yeah, I do live an interesting life, and I'm not. I would not probably be a good clinical psychologist because I didn't like the responsibility that getting back to psychology, I didn't like the responsibility that therapists have, because on this given unit, Northwestern Hospital, there was 4 doctors, and I would say 2 were great and 2 were bad. I think 2, because I would see patients getting these two doctors not getting better, and I'd see patients of these two doctors getting better. And I just felt like, wow, that's right there. That's scary.
Yeah.
And then you see like the stakes are high because if somebody is disturbed, wrong medication, a threat to themselves, a threat to others, and you misdiagnose it and give them a weekend pass, or you give them whatever, the wrong meds. So that to me was like, okay, I was never going to go to med school anyways and prescribe meds, but just the idea of managing that life in an intense way where your decisions could have a negative, really tragic impact.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want that responsibility. So that's why I ended up in comedy and specifically sketch and improv, because you never are the sole person to blame.
I see. Yeah. So your biggest failures in comedies, you don't make someone laugh.
Yeah, big deal.
Tragedy.
Yeah, exactly. I learned that lesson really early on. Like I have no problem sucking, and I've sucked many times on stage, but to the disappointment of an audience, I'm sure. But
it's not a tragedy.
It didn't. No, I did stand up, and stand up was hard because stand up, it always felt like I was in a hotel room in Michigan and the audience hated me and I'm just alone. And I'm just like, ugh, I don't even know what to do with this shame or this depression.
Improv is a happier form of comedy.
Yeah.
Speaking of Paris, this is a little bit of a weird thing, but you have mentioned how fond you are of Peter Sellers as a comedian. Mm-hmm. And so I'm thinking Pink Panther, et cetera, that kind of stuff. But so tell me why. Like, what is it? So I feel like Peter Sellers, if you ask people to name kind of famous comedians who have passed, if you mention Peter Sellers, people will recognize him, but they might not bring him up. So I'm curious about your fondness for Peter Sellers. Where it comes from.
Part of it is like just bonding at an early age with the films he had made, the Pink Panthers, the Being There, The Party. He's Dr. Strangelove. A lot of that stuff I saw in a very like indelibly imprinted moments in my life, teen years, where like when we first got our VHS tapes or whatever, like truly.
Yeah, sure.
So part of it is that I realized that, but also like a first love, if you will, because I also loved Woody Allen back then when I was discovering him. But I think for me, Peter Sellers' unique quality is his pacing, his sort of, he could really go super slow and get a laugh in those silences or that inaction. And that really, and also his like sort of false, his confident buffoonery, like he was always sort of arrogant about his competence in the Pink Panther role. And then never good on execution. So that always made me laugh. But I think the unique trait for him is just his sort of pacing. And then obviously just a chameleon, just the range of characters he played was spectacular. Spectacular. Yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned this idea of silence twice now. To me, that strikes me as like a wise comedic approach, right? So my sense is young comedians want to fill the air. They want to tell jokes. They want to, and they want to make things happen. And what it sounds like you're describing, there are moments in time where you want to do nothing to make something happen.
Well, I can only say it works for me. Okay. Like I don't think I would make an audience laugh their butt off if I was like the really chatty sort of comic persona.
Okay.
I don't know if I have the quick mind for it. I don't know if I have the material for it, but I just don't. It doesn't serve me or what my skill set is. I do better in situations where I can react in a grounded way and play things realistically. I love playing stupid moments, like really dumb choices, and playing them or absurd choices and playing them as believable as possible.
Okay.
That always tickles me. But in general, like everybody has range. Like we do a kids show every year. My wife's like, that's my favorite thing you do, because we play elves and we're just so hyper and energetic and dumb. But I don't really play that a lot.
Okay.
So, but for me, I think there's a lot of power in the silence or the sort of stillness and the listening side of comedy.
I see. Yeah, it's fun. Now, I had Billy Merritt on recently, and Billy, he has a forthcoming book about this sort of taxonomy of improv. That he has this idea of, it's called Robot Pirate Ninja.
Okay.
So essentially, the idea behind it is that there's these sort of two forms of improvisers that you naturally tend to be. So like the pirate is the like fearless performer who's like, as he described it, like the tornado that comes through the room, so to speak.
Yeah.
And then there's there's the robot, which is a little not as sort of fast and intuitive, but is a little colder and more calculated.
Okay.
And then the idea is that if you do it long enough and well enough, you can become a ninja where you could move between those two styles. So that's the sort of
I'd buy that metaphor or whatever that is. Yeah.
So I'm curious. So I was watching old AssCat videos. So like basically on YouTube, and I was trying to characterize the sort of gang of four, the four of you, original UCB people, as pirates or robots.
Okay.
And
what did you come up with?
Well, I am actually curious what you strike me as a little bit more of a robot.
Okay. All right.
And then who developed into a ninja.
Okay.
Matt
Besser's a pirate?
it seems like a pirate to me.
Yeah. Amy?
I couldn't tell. I think she might have been a ninja very early on.
I feel like Ian is probably ninja, but initially robot. Because he's so good. Well, he's so good at logic.
All of you are ninjas now. There's no doubt about that. But
he's so good at logic. Ian is so good at improvising logic around any crazy. Like you could come in and lay at Ian's feet the most ridiculous sentence, and he would, through the course of that scene, he would help us both understand what got us to this moment before.
Yeah.
He's very good at that. Extemporaneous logic.
Yeah, I can see that.
That's sort of natural gift. But yeah, he's a ninja too. I guess we're all ninjas. Sure.
Now, of course. I mean, it's just like I've done 101 and 201 in LA, and I'm so much of a robot that it's
funny what improv is for me now. Truly is like Sunday night I'll go and do the free show where there's no I've completely created this life where I don't have to like deliver anything. Like it's a free show. We always end up giving away like t-shirts at the top, or like I'll go to gifting suites and get swag and then give it away to people.
That's fun.
It is fun. So it's like a free show. So like I completely have every right to be self-indulgent and be a goofball. Like I don't feel any burden to deliver.
Yeah.
So I've created this life in a theater that I help create as well. So it's very like pick up basketball, and I do like once or twice a month. But the challenge for me, so I've set this up for myself. It's almost like Shaquille O'Neal having a pickup basketball game in his own gym, and and he invites all his friends to watch. That's how I feel. I feel like everyone's friendly and it's pretty easy. But the challenge inside of like shows in general is like, oh, I've done this before. Like the creeping thing of like doing improv for 25 years is like, oh, I've done this before. Like, I feel like, I wish I didn't always do this character or something. You judge yourself a little bit. And so that's sort of like the behavior or the psychology of it all, because going back to what we were talking about earlier, the thing you were talking about clinical behavioral psychology, the thing I took from the doctors at Northwestern was like, generally human beings have these destructive behavior patterns that start in our lives, and you have to recognize them, and then you have to change those patterns. And the problem with behavior patterns is simply repeating them is gratifying.
Yeah, and then
it's unconsciously gratifying. Yeah. It's reinforcing.
That's right.
And so it somehow applies to improv. I guess we make these tendencies and these choices where you want to expand. Like, I'm never going to be a character that's not Matt Walsh. Like, I don't know that I'll ever fully, unless I had prosthetics where people wouldn't recognize me. But like, I own, and also that's why I'm human. Like, I love that I can make choices that incorporate my history as a human being on the planet, the things I've seen, the relationships I've had. That's great. That's using a fountain of experience and then regurgitating it to hopefully get an audience to laugh. That's amazing. But it is also that other side of it where you're getting on stage and you want to challenge yourself just a little bit, like 2%, do something 2% different over the course of an hour and a half show. And that's sort of the psychology of it, really. Yeah.
That's, it's interesting in my world, when I teach and when I'm with my friends, I'm basically the same person. I'm a little more crass when I'm with my friends.
Right.
you strike me just hanging. This is my second time speaking to you at length. You strike me as kind of closely related to many of the characters I've seen you.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm curious, what is the most different character? Like the character you've played. So it sounds like also when you improv, you're kind of Matt Walsh volume turned up a little.
Yeah.
What character is most different from Matt Walsh?
I should have a list of characters. Well, in some ways, I think like my current job as Mike McClintock, he's very different than me.
Okay.
Because there's many, like he's a little stupider than I am, like aggressively stupider than I am. I think he's more of like a glutton for punishment than I am.
Okay.
Like the unhealthy, like just adhering to these old relationships that aren't serving him well and still believing, his whatever crazy purchases, he's terribly financially irresponsible or like wishful, almost like buying lottery tickets with his money.
Sure.
That kind of guy. I'm not like that. So there's a lot of traits in Mike that
are much different than you.
Much different than me. So that's an example of someone. But as far as like a character, I mean, Besser made a movie.
Stretching. This idea of stretching yourself. You said you're just talking about 2%. And so then, but is there someone that you did this like?
Yeah, like corny ways. Like I liked, like doing an accent. I played in like a small movie. I played like a Russian guy who owned a roller rink. I liked that.
That's different.
Because that was like two talents. One was like speaking Russian and believably speaking Russian, hopefully. And then the second one was actually like roller skating a little bit, which I'm not good at. So that was like a couple layers of departure. So that was fun to do. That was a stretch.
Yes.
Oh, and he was also like criminal. So there was several layers. Like a role like that was like, oh, I'd love to try that because that felt like a real departure for me. So that's an example. I think it was called Big Night or something like that. I forget the name of it. It's out there.
That's funny. I don't know what I'd be worse at, the Russian accent or the roller skating.
Roller skating is more challenging. And I took the kids with me too, and they of course were better at wiping out. But when you're 50 and you fall on your ass in roller skates, it does not feel good at all. And it stays and it bruises.
I bet. I'm 6'5", so on roller skates, I'm 6'9". It's a long way to go down. I won't do it. I don't care how much I like the woman and she wants to go on a date. Oh, the other one was ice skating.
Oh, ice skating hurts too.
I had a girlfriend who wanted to go ice skating. I was like, I like you, but no. I like myself more.
That's an injury waiting to happen.
It's just so hard.
Yeah.
Last question.
Sure.
What are you reading, watching, or listening to that really stands out? That's great.
What am I reading? I get a book every year from my mother-in-law, Robin.
Is it self-help?
No. She's a real literature junkie, really into poetry, really smart lady. She gave me a book, which I'm halfway done with, by Louise Edrich, and it's called, I think it's The Future Home of the Living God.
Okay.
And it's about a woman who's carrying a baby, and she was inseminated by an angel. She had sex with an angel.
Okay.
And it's sort of a apocalyptic future. There's like a whole thing happening. I feel like that's going to be really good, or it is really good along the way.
Sounds like a movie in the making.
Yeah, it very well could be. Yeah, it's big. It's big in scope. And then the cliche ones, like I think I've probably said this in other interviews. I really was blown away by like Sapiens and Homo Deus. Those two books were just incredible.
I keep talking about Sapiens.
Did you read Homo Deus?
I did. I was less impressed.
Really?
Yes.
Okay. Well, that's fair. I didn't love it. It's bleak.
But that's exactly the point. What I loved about Sapiens is this is a historian. And so it's backward facing.
Yeah.
And so it's accurate.
Yeah.
Forward facing stuff, I'm not a big believer in we can predict the future.
Yeah.
And so
that's fair. I gave him much respect because of his first book. I'm like, well, this is definitely happening. It's still,
look, the book's still beautifully written and it's provocative, and I enjoyed I enjoyed reading it. To me, Sapiens was just exquisite.
Yeah. And then I read, a friend of mine recommended a book called The True Believers. And the only reason he's a guy named Sang Kang, who was the only Korean kid in my junior high.
Okay.
And he lives in San Diego, and he's the one who hooked me up with this candidate running for Congress in our hometown, because he's like from my high school, and he always gives me the gossip about people I don't really know anymore. And anyway, lovely guy. He recommended this book called The True Believers, and it's interesting because it's about the AIDS crisis in Chicago from like 84 to like 96. And that's exactly when I was living in Chicago.
That's interesting.
And so that was mind blowing it's a very good story, and it's obviously tragic, but wonderful. And also like having someone walk you through the environs that you as a young man were like passing, going through, restaurants you shared, like people you may have like, there was a guy from my theater, The Annoyance, who was one of the first guys I knew who passed away from AIDS in, I don't know what year it was, probably 90, I'll say 91. But anyways, that was a fascinating book just because of my personal experience with that city in the near north side of Boys Town, because I lived at Halstead and Addison. I lived at Newport and Halstead. I lived at like right on top of all of it.
That's
and
fun.
My theater companies, The Annoyance, was at Belmont and Broadway. And that's where I met a guy named David who passed in the 90s from it. And then they moved to like Clark Street and right by Wrigley. And so the intersection of those lives, it's just I've never had the opportunity to read a book. It's like, oh my God.
Your home.
Yeah. Oh my God. Like so much detail about the places I was spending a decade.
Yeah. And filling in blanks.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's really interesting.
It was fascinating. Yeah.
And this is the last part of this question. So you live in LA, you're in your car a lot.
I am.
What are you listening to in your car?
What do I do in the car? Do
you do calls?
I roll calls? That's a great time. Usually going home for some reason, I feel like, the call I've been putting off. The call you're supposed to do in the first part of the day. I always end up doing at the end of the day.
Okay.
The annoying calls. And then podcast wise, I like Political Gab Fest on Slate. I love Krista Tippett. Guy Raz, what's that one? It's kind of like Making It or something like that. He talks to business people.
The guy How I Built This.
How I Built This.
That's a great podcast.
That's a great podcast.
I actually make
99% Invisible is remarkably excellent. I love that one.
I make my students listen to How I Built This.
Oh, good.
Episodes sometimes.
Yeah.
It's better than reading a case often.
It is. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
It's really, really good. So those are like, and then Criminal. I'm on Criminal. I dip into it. It's like usually revolves around a crime, but it could be like how a parking law was developed in Denver in 1950 to keep hobos off the street or whatever. But it's usually like an unsolved murder or a runaway or something but it always involves some kind of small crime.
Okay.
Or a real crime, big crime. Yeah.
Matt, I really appreciate you doing this.
It was fun.
Yeah, it's good to see you.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to visit petermcgraw.org for more information about our guest, show notes, and social media links. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share with others. Join Dr. Peter McGraw.